A house divided cannot stand. These words aren't mine. They're straight from the Bible and can be found in 3 of the 4 Gospels. They're echoed in the Islamic Quran, in several surahs, and they're so powerful that Abraham Lincoln built one of his most famous speeches around them. And today, some of the world's leading thinkers, like billionaire investor Ray Dalio, in his amazing book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order, are warning that those same forces of division are tearing at the fabric of America, the UK, and countries across the globe. Think about it for yourself, and I hope that you will consider the world that you see outside and on social media, and consider it as we work through this video. When families split apart, when communities turn against each other, and when nations can't agree on anything, let alone what's true and who we can trust, collapse doesn't come from the outside, it comes from within. And here's the big question I want to explore with you in this video. What does scripture, history, and hard data tell us about this growing crisis, and what we can do about it before the house comes crashing down? So here at the 4 Ideals, I like to bring ancient wisdom and use it for modern awakening in this very present moment. How can we use these parables, these ancient scriptures, and this wisdom from the wealth of religious history to understand ourselves better, understand the world better, and also the direction we're going? Do we want to have more division and hate and separation, or do we want love and unity? And yes, this can be considered woo-woo and hippie, but again, we have some stark warnings in the scriptures, which is where I want to begin with you. And we're going to go right to the Bible. In 3 of the biblical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we find this quote, "And Jesus knew their thoughts and said unto them, Every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand." Matthew 12:25. "And if a kingdom be divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house be divided against itself, that house cannot stand." And that's from Mark 3:25. And finally, "But he, knowing their thoughts, said unto them, Every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and a house divided against a house falleth." So there's Jesus teaching his apostles and followers that a house divided against itself cannot stand. And this is ancient wisdom found in the New Testament. All Christians will likely be aware of this parable, this concept. But if you didn't know, it's also echoed in the Islamic Quran. And in the Quran, we find these quotes from Surah Al-Imran, which is chapter 3, verse 103. "Hold fast to God's rope altogether. Do not split into factions." And from Surah Al-An'am, ayat, the cattle, chapter 6, verse 159. "As for those who have divided their religion and broken up into factions, have nothing to do with them. Their case rests with God. In time he will tell them about their deeds." This for me is mind-boggling, that in these 2 of arguably the most popular scriptures across time, the Christian Gospels and the Islamic Quran, it is stated explicitly that you shouldn't split up into factions. A house should not be divided within itself. Yet, in these religions, we have many factions. We have lots of division and war and killing and hatred, even within the religion itself. So how do we expect religions that have division within to, get along and have understandings with other religions? This is something very interesting that I'll be talking about a lot more here at the 4 Ideals. But ultimately, this is a stark warning coming from deep history that is as relevant today, even more relevant today as it ever was, and it has been across history, which brings us to Abraham Lincoln's House Divided speech from 1858. Abraham Lincoln delivered his House Divided speech on June the 16th, 1858 at the Illinois state capitol in Springfield after accepting the Republican nomination for U.S. Senate. The speech warned that the nation could not endure permanently half-slave, half-free. Though Lincoln lost the Senate race to Stephen Douglas, the address electrified Republicans across the North and set the stage for the famous Lincoln-Douglas debates. Later, when Lincoln ran for president, he published the debates with this speech at the front of the volume, cementing it as one of his most famous addresses alongside the Gettysburg Address and his second inaugural. Now, I won't read the whole speech unless that's something that you'd like to hear, and then I'll certainly consider it. But I have this wonderful Penguin book of historic speeches, and I have its modern version, Modern Speeches. And so I'll just read a few lines from the speech from 1858. And it says here, "In my opinion, it will not cease until a crisis shall have been reached and passed. A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure permanently half slave and half free. I do not expect the Union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided." And so here Lincoln isn't predicting or sort of talking to civil war and trying to stoke the flames. He's just saying that he's warning that the nation cannot endure this half slave and half free, and they need to unify. They can't be so separate. And again, when we look across the world and the geopolitical divide currently, which we'll come to in much more detail in a moment with Ray Dalio, this is as important today as ever. And again, a house divided against itself cannot stand. A nation divided cannot but fall in time, especially when we need to consider that there are external forces through algorithms, through social media, through bots, are certainly, definitely stoking the flames of division and trying to, rile up the whole nation. And so this is something that we should also keep in mind when we're scrolling on social media and seeing these posts. But there's a moral and political and societal sort of aspect of all of this. And that's where we come to next when we talk about Ray Dalio and his wonderful book, Principles for Dealing with the Changing World Order, Why Nations Succeed and Fall. And it's a rather heady book. It's absolutely wonderful, to be honest. I have read it several times because it sort of really informed my view of the world. There's another two books that I've spoken about before, the Strauss How Generational Theory, the books which this concept comes out of, this thesis comes out of. The Fourth Turning, and The Fourth Turning is here. I highly recommend all of these books. But if you don't have time to read all these books, you can head over to YouTube, and I think there's a 43-minute and also a much shorter video that you can go and watch. And so I'd highly recommend getting the book and reading it and getting a full breakdown and a full understanding of Ray Dalio's thesis. But if you don't have time, as I've just shared, go and watch these short YouTube videos. But Ray Dalio speaks about the 8 key measurements of countries' strengths, and they are education, technology, competitiveness, economic output, world trade, military strength, financial centers, and reserve currency. And he, of course, in this book is speaking about the changing world order, why nations succeed and fail. And in it, there's a wonderful chapter, The Last 500 Years in a Tiny Nutshell, and he speaks about the Dutch Empire, the British Empire, and now the US Empire, and how these have all risen and fallen, and how the US Empire has reached its zenith, it's reached its peak, and it's on the decline. And then he goes on to speculate about what may happen next. But he also talks about the 6 key signs of an empire in decline. And they are when interest rates hit 0%, when there's significant money printing, which causes a financial crisis, which in turn brings wealth gaps, which causes internal conflict, which of course, as always there is in the world of geopolitics, there is external conflict. And so as nations ebb and flow and rise and fall, these factors have a contributing effect on what occurs in the country. And as they increase, the tensions get higher. Of course, all of these things, what we're talking about here is a house divided. So we're going to focus on the internal conflict. But again, I really am taken by Ray Dalio's thesis, and we'll talk about it a lot more here in the form of ideals, how we can find ideals with which to aspire towards rather than being wallowing in hatred and division. We need to find an ideal to move towards. But Ray Dalio goes on to say regarding internal conflict, the classic toxic mix is usually accompanied by other problems. The more of the following conditions that are in place, the higher the probability of having a severe conflict like a civil war or revolution. These are decadence, bureaucracy, populism and extremism, class warfare, loss of truth in the public domain, and rule following fades and fighting begins. So to tie all this back in, Ray Dalio's modern economic and geopolitical view of the world ties back, just like in the scripture of the Gospels and the Quran and Abraham Lincoln's speech. Dalio is warning that this internal division is amongst the greatest threat, as much as the other rising powers are a threat. What is the most terrifying, I would argue, and why I'm making this video, is the internal division. So what can we do about it? What can I do about the rising sort of polarization within US and UK politics? Again, we got to start from the personal level. So, of course, everything begins with ourselves, with our inner life, what we can do, what we can control. And so we can cultivate, as Jordan Peterson would often say, clean your own room up. Why are you talking about world politics when your room's dirty? So put your house in order, I would argue. Develop family, community, friendships, and our inner life. I would argue that's the most important. If we are at peace in ourselves, then regardless of what's going on in the world, there's the analogy, isn't there, of being in the eye of the storm. Inside the eye of the storm and the hurricane, all is still when all around you is going crazy. And I think it's a Rudyard Kipling poem, I think, when the world around you is losing their head, stay stable, be at peace as best you can. And then we move up to the community level. We could argue that here at the Four Ideals, we're building, is a small community at the moment, but we're building community. If people come in and listen and resonate with these ideas, religious unification, syncretism, the power of the ancient wisdom of all of these religious avatars, scriptures, prophets, and philosophies, then we can begin to build community, develop and build bridges, not walls. Many religions, as I said, split themselves into factions, put up a giant wall, and even though there's a lot of Muslims on the other side of the wall, they follow the wrong things. They're emphasizing the wrong things. They're the wrong sect. And so, don't come over this wall or there'll be trouble. And so we've got to engage respectfully across our differences. Something, again, Charlie Kirk is ultimately been martyred for the fact that he was willing to engage with liberal ideas respectfully, with love and compassion, you could argue, and for that he suffered the worst atrocity of internal division. His life was taken from him, and that brings us to a cultural level that healthy conversation, healthy competition is good, and destructive division is ruinous. So ancient, historical, and modern voices all agree that unity is survival and division is collapse. And so to conclude, a house divided against itself cannot stand. And it's not just theology, not just politics, not just economics. It's a universal law. It's a perennial truth, a syncretic wisdom of human life that echoes across the ages. And what we should be considering is, how do we view the world? Are we open to people with different views. If we are in a religion and are very orthodox in that religion, do we have time for people within the different sects, different factions? Are we opening dialogue with other religious traditions to learn what they focus on, to learn why they love God and their prophet so much, rather than saying, you know, you call your God the wrong term, so I'm going to attack you for it? And I'll leave you with a question, and I'd love to know your thoughts and comments in the comments. And if you have anything else that you'd like to ask or you want me to talk further about, how can we move from destructive division to healthy unity today? What have I missed? What do I need to see? And maybe you're a person who is fed up with being tolerant. Maybe you've had enough of tolerance. Maybe you do need to put up walls. Maybe you do need to push out these factions. Let me know in the comments. I respect everyone's opinion here at the Four Ideals, but for me, I think that if we can bring people together to find unity, love, and hope, that is what the future should be built upon.